Hi, looks like we're live. So if you can see me and you can hear me, say hi in the chat. That will take a few seconds to appear for me. So let me tell you a few things about me. My name is Alan. I'm a tutor on Cambly. I love football, reading, music, and movies. It's great to see you all again. My first live was a lot of fun, and you guys were great. So we decided to do another one on the IELTS exam. Lots of questions and answers today. And let me see. In case you don't know, Cambly is an e-learning platform for smartphone, tablet, and PC that allows you to chat with native English tutors like me 24/7 at the touch of a button. You can try it for 15 minutes for just 99 rupees. Okay, let's have a look at the chat. Hello, everyone. I see somebody's asking for tips on reading. Don't worry, we'll have tips about that. I saw someone earlier saying that they didn't have a specific question. So don't worry, we'll be covering lots of topics today. So it should be fun. So let's see. Let's start off talking about the speaking exam. This is one that a lot of people focus on. One question that I get asked very often is, if you were allowed to ask questions in the speaking part of the exam, are you allowed to ask the person asking you questions your own question? So let me see. The only question that you're allowed to ask is if they can repeat the question for you, nothing else. The examiner is actually not allowed to tell you anything other than the question. So don't waste time asking. They're not allowed to explain anything or to rephrase it and put it in a different way. It's not just the questions that they're not allowed to explain. They can't explain individual words for you either. The examiner is limited to asking questions only in speaking part 1 and can't help you or explain. The examiner can't explain words exactly. My advice here is to just try to answer what you think they might be asking. If you can speak well and follow the other tips that I've given before and will give today, you can still get a very good score, even if you're not perfectly sure what it is that you're asked. But what about part 2? You can't ask any questions in part 2. You're not allowed to change the topic or pick a different card, so don't waste time asking questions. As I'm sure you know, there are very strict time limits in part 2, so don't waste time asking questions or asking for a different topic because nothing is going to change. My advice here is to just try your best to talk about something related to your cue card. If you don't understand a word on your cue card, the examiner won't be of any help. So try to answer the parts that you do understand and use any extra time that you have to speak about something very closely related to the topic. And you might end up answering that part anyway. You need to speak for at least 1 minute in this section, so make sure you reach that goal by answering the parts you do not understand and fill in the rest with something closely related. Also, you don't need to ask when to stop talking. Say as much as you can, and the examiner will tell you that you can finish when you reach the 2-minute mark anyway. So, what about part 3? Yes, you can ask the examiner to explain words and to explain the question in IELTS speaking part 3. This is great for you because the examiner will rephrase the question using different words and make it easier for you to understand. You can also ask the examiner to repeat the question, just like in part 1. Here's some useful questions that you can ask. Could you explain that to me, please? What exactly do you mean by that? Could you explain what that word means? What does this mean? Don't ask if the examiner understands you. If you say something and you're not sure you said it correctly, don't say, do you understand? Do you get what I mean? Or if you give your opinion on something, don't ask if they agree with you. And if you talk about something a little bit unusual or something that you think they might not know about, maybe a city or a town that you visited on holiday, don't say, do you know this place? Have you been there? This next tip is very useful. It helps you to buy some time during part 1 and 3. Sometimes you need to think about the question and to think about your answer. A method for doing that is to ask them to repeat the question. It's a useful way to gain time to think, or you can say, oh, that's interesting, or I never thought about that before. This is very useful for part 3 type questions where you have to express an opinion, and it might be an unusual topic or something you've legitimately never ever thought about before, and that does happen a lot. So be prepared to talk about something that you've never talked about before. Don't worry about losing points for asking questions. It won't happen, or it won't have any impact on your score. Fluency, grammar, vocabulary, pronunciation, these are the criteria that you will be judged on. So it is absolutely okay to ask them to repeat 1 or 2 questions to help you understand the question better. Or, like I said, give yourself a little bit of extra time to think about what you want to say and give an excellent answer. Another question I get asked a lot: should you try to use a British or American accent? No, definitely not. You won't get any extra points for speaking in someone else's accent. You just need to speak clearly and slowly. Your score is based on your grammar, your fluency, your vocabulary, and your pronunciation, like I said. Because of this, if you try to put on a fake accent, then you will most likely lose points by doing that. Putting on a fake accent will definitely have an impact on your fluency and your pronunciation. And all that energy you're spending on making sure your accent sounds right is energy that you should really be spending on making your grammar as nice as possible, make it as interesting as possible, and try to remember relevant words that you can improve, that you can use to impress the person who's listening to you. Now, I'm going to go to the chat and see what questions our viewers have. I'd just like to remind everyone that for just 99 rupees, you can get a 15-minute trial on Cambly, and you can come and ask any questions you like in a one-on-one setting with me and other tutors just like me. And if you don't have any questions about IELTS, then you're welcome to come chat about anything else, or even to work on some specific part of the English language. Remember to feel free to ask certain questions in part 1 and 3, but you're not allowed to ask questions in part 2. When I say part 1 questions, you can ask them to repeat. Could you repeat that? That kind of thing. Buy yourself time. Don't put on a fake accent. It won't help you, and it will most likely cause you problems. So let's see. Do they judge confidence while speaking? No, they don't specifically judge confidence, but having confidence can help you. It's very useful. Just because it's going to come across as speaking naturally. If you're scared, you're going to speak maybe slowly in a disjointed fashion. So actually, I'm going to speak a little bit about confidence because it's something that I'm often asked. Writing and reading skills. I see there we have some questions and answers prepared for that in a little while. Let's see. Okay, let's get to those. So confidence, very important. We briefly talked about it the last time. A lot of people tell me they lack confidence. Some people get very nervous when they are taking the exam, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's normal. The IELTS exam can be very important for people. It might mean a new job, admission to college, or the ability to move to another country. So it's only natural that people are a little bit nervous when they take the exam. One way to help yourself is to use positive self-talk, positive visualization. Imagine yourself sitting in the examiner's room. Imagine yourself speaking confidently and smoothly. Imagine yourself doing well. That might sound a little strange, but it works. It's something that a lot of sports psychologists advise athletes to do, and it's very common among people competing at the Olympics, for example. So if it can work for people competing in the toughest, most difficult competition in the world with millions of people watching in stadiums and on the TV and the internet at home, then it can work for you while you're sitting in a quiet examiner's room. Just remember, think positive. And speaking of famous athletes, maybe the greatest boxer of all time, Muhammad Ali, he used to use a lot of positive self-talk. He once said, "I am the greatest. I said it before I even knew I was." You can see that his positivity and his self-confidence came out because he only ever spoke about himself in a positive light. So when you start to have doubts, if you start to tell yourself that you're not going to do well, then just remind yourself that you are going to do well, that you're doing great with your practice, and that you're going to speak confidently and coolly, and that you can get the score that you want. But none of this is worth anything unless you practice. Remember that practice makes perfect. Keep practicing your speaking, your vocabulary. Do it until you can practically take this exam in your sleep. Then when you do take the exam, you will be perfectly confident. Something to remember is that when we are speaking and we are nervous, it's not as obvious to other people as we think it is. Sometimes we think that maybe our voice is shaking or we're taking too long to answer a question. It might seem like 10 or 15 seconds, but really it might just be 2 or 3. And the examiners have seen plenty of nervous people. They will understand because, as I said, it's normal. So don't feel embarrassed. Just concentrate on answering the questions and you'll be fine. Now, like I mentioned earlier when I was talking to the chat, one thing that can really be damaged by a lack of confidence is fluency. You want your spoken English to flow evenly and clearly. You want it to sound as natural as possible. So I'm going to give you some tips on how you can speak more fluently. Like I said earlier, if you pause a lot, a nice trick is to use fillers. Say, that's interesting. Oh, that's a good question. And remember that you can ask the examiner to repeat the questions in part 1 and 3. Paraphrasing is a very useful one. If you can't remember a word, a specific word, and you're spending time trying to think of it, you're costing yourself time, and it might make it so that you're not able to express yourself in the way that you want. So try paraphrasing. Paraphrasing is using a different way to describe something. For example, a waterfall. You can't remember the word for waterfall that you saw while you were on holidays. So you said you saw water falling off the edge of a cliff. That's a nice way to use it instead. Describe what you're thinking of if you can't think of the exact word. Another important one, focus on when to use pauses correctly. Use them at the end of sentences, at the end of clauses. At the end of a sentence, you should pause for a moment. When you see a comma, you should pause for a slightly smaller moment. It's very important to do this so that all of your sentences don't run together and you can be more easily understood. And a big one, allow yourself to make mistakes. Everybody makes mistakes. It's very rare that somebody speaks in their daily life or especially in an exam. Everybody makes mistakes, so don't worry about it. Just move on. You can correct yourself if you want to as well. So let's go over to the chat and see if people have any questions about this. So somebody asks if they will be interacting and learning with a single teacher, or if your teacher will be changed every time. You can interact with the same teacher repeatedly if you want. I have many people who speak to me 3, 4, 5 times a week. They always come back because they enjoy classes together. And if you don't like a tutor, you don't feel that they fill your specific needs, it's okay to try different people all the time. I have some people who speak to me once a week, and 3 or 4 days of the week they're speaking to other tutors. They like to go to different people for different things. That's fine. There's a question there. If we stop for 5 or 10 seconds between speaking, are we going to lose marks? I would say 5 seconds is the upper limit of how long you should pause for. Take 1 or 2 seconds. Sometimes when we're speaking, it seems like it's a lot longer, like I said. So take your time, but don't wait too long. Okay, there's a question there. If you don't have any idea regarding a topic, how to start? Well, that depends what you're talking about. Are you talking about speaking? If you are, I recommend picking an article from a website or reading a book and reading it out loud and getting used to speaking this way. Reading a book on a subject or an article about a subject is a great way to pick up more vocabulary. And also because you're reading it, you learn how it should be used in a sentence. One piece of advice that I give to lots of people, I mentioned it last time, take a notebook, write down any interesting or unusual words or words that you're not sure of. And later on, you can go on Google or get a dictionary or come to me or any other tutor on Cambly, and you can ask them what it means. Okay, someone is asking about fillers. Filler words, or maybe making like a noise like or or something like this in the exam. Yeah, you should probably avoid doing that too often, but it's okay to say, like I said earlier, say, oh, that's interesting, or oh, I like the sound of that. Okay. Remember to use positive visualizations and positive self-talk. Don't put yourself down. Don't think that you will do badly. Retain your fluency, speak as clearly as possible, and you'll do just fine. Okay, let's look at the written part of the exam. Somebody in the chat was wanting some information about this. Part 1. Do you need to write a conclusion for part 1? No, you do not. Don't confuse a conclusion with an overview. A conclusion is often about a matter of opinion, And part 1 isn't asking for your opinion. They simply want you to report on what you've seen. And it doesn't need to be at the end of the written piece either. It can be the second paragraph if you like. It's nice to get it done and out of the way early. At least that way you'll be guaranteed some points if you run out of time trying to answer it. In part 2, are you allowed to use personal pronouns for part 2? Well, first, what are personal pronouns? I, you, he, she, it, we, they, me, him, her, us, and them. Well, the answer is yes, but only sometimes. Sometimes it makes sense to use them. In general, though, part 2 is supposed to be a more formal piece, so try to avoid them if you can. Sometimes it makes sense to use personal pronouns. If you're giving your personal opinion, then you're allowed to do it. If you're giving a personal anecdote, then again, you're welcome to do it, as long as it's directly related to the question. But in general, I would recommend trying to avoid them. When you get asked a question, do you agree or disagree with this point of view? Well, they say it's an intelligent mind, that it takes an intelligent mind to be able to entertain both sides of an argument. But that doesn't always make for a nice written piece. If the question is, do you agree or disagree, then you better do what the question asks and write that you agree or disagree. It's not asking you for the positive and negative aspects of a certain point of view. It's okay to acknowledge that there are positive and negative sides to something, but don't spend your time writing a well-balanced essay. No matter how good it is, it can still cost you points. Stick to one side and write as well as possible about that. Okay, let's go back to the chat and see if people have any questions about that. So somebody asked, how can we improve reading? Well, practice, like everything. So you might think it's a little bit odd or a little bit strange, but practice, I recommend practicing with a children's book or a very simple book. It's okay to begin with it. I do when I'm learning other languages. It's not a problem. From there, you can expand and get better. If you want some interesting books that are good for children, I always recommend the author Roald Dahl. He's very famous, has some very interesting stories to tell. Okay. There's a question here. Can we write more than 250 words in part 2? Well, you're not supposed to. You should write about 250. I think a safe rule that I always see is 10%. So try to aim for between 225 and 275. Don't go much higher or lower than that, but I definitely wouldn't recommend going higher. If you can aim for 240, 250, that's perfect. How to make sure about pronunciation? How to make sure about pronunciation? That's a good question. So let's see. By speaking with native speakers, that's the absolute best way. Ideally, if you want to improve your English a huge amount, you can live in a country or a place where people speak English all the time. That's not possible for everyone. So what I recommend is talking to tutors like me online, listening to podcasts, watching movies in English. If you like, you can watch a movie or a TV show in English and have some subtitles on in your own language. So when you hear a word or a phrase and you're not sure of it, you can check what it means in the subtitles and practice saying it out loud sometimes. A lot of people don't realize that to practice speaking and pronunciation, you do have to say it out loud. It's not enough to think it. Excellent. Somebody says there, read English newspapers. That's a really good idea. Read them out loud. Somebody wants to know, to interact with pupils, what kind of topics are best to speak about? Well, that's up to you. If you come to a tutor and ask if you just say that you want a conversation or you want to practice speaking, if you don't have something prepared, don't worry. They'll have something prepared. Everybody does. Very interesting questions there. Okay. Let's talk about reading. They This next question is a question that comes up often and was asked several times the last time I did an IELTS video here for Cambly, India. So if you're that person who was asking last time, then I'm glad I was able to come back and answer it for you, and I hope you find it helpful. It's the true, false, not given questions. Some people have a little bit of trouble understanding the idea, so I'm going to explain and give some examples. Okay, so let me explain it first. If the fact or the statement matches what you've read, then it is true. If the statement contradicts the information that you've been given, then it's false. If nobody says anything about this information, then it's not given. So, for example, if I write on a piece of paper, the sky is blue, and then in the question section it says, is the sky blue? Yes. Is the sky green? No. False. What did Alan have for breakfast this morning? Not given. He didn't say. Okay. Another useful tip here is don't expect to understand every word. It's not likely that you will. Sometimes you'll be able to get a good idea of what the word means from the context. In other words, how it's used, where it is used, what the sentence around it means. Just like every other part of the exam, you have a limited amount of time. Don't spend it trying to understand a word, especially if it's not particularly important to the answers. If you can't figure it out from the context, then move along and give it your best guess. Be careful when transferring your answers. This is so important. You'll be asked to transfer your answers to an answer sheet. Sometimes people spend too much time reading, answering the questions, and they don't give themselves enough time to write them onto the answer sheet. This is a big problem. Make sure you manage your time well. You don't want to spend so much time practicing and then losing out on points because you didn't leave enough time for you to write your correct answers on the page. If you can find an IELTS answer sheet, find one of these and practice. Practice transferring them. This allows you to do it much more quickly in the exam, and you can spend more time answering questions. Do not leave blank spaces on the answer sheet. If you're not sure about an answer, guess. It's not a problem. Just make an attempt at it. You won't lose points for trying, and you could gain some. Okay, remember guys, you can come ask me questions one-to-one on Cambly. You can get a 15-minute trial for just 99 rupees. And I want to know what questions you have over here in the chat. Okay, so this person here says, I can speak, I'm practicing listening, reading, and speaking, but I'm doing lots of grammatical mistakes. How do I reduce this mistake? Okay, so again, practice. Try to speak to a native, preferably a tutor. Try to listen to movies, TV shows, podcasts. Imitate what people say. If you like the way a sentence sounds, it's probably because it's formed very well. It's created in a proper fashion. So imitate what you hear people saying until it becomes second nature for you. After this, it won't be a problem. Somebody wants to know about speaking business English. On Cambly, we have specific courses available for people who want to speak business English. Personally, what I like to do with people, I will teach them some words and phrases. Anyone who knows native English speakers know that we use idioms a lot. And this is true for business, of course. If you're going back to the drawing board, you're going back to square one. If you're working 24/7, if you need someone to answer you ASAP, you've probably heard all of these phrases before. And these are the kind of phrases that I like to begin with. Even if you can't speak perfectly at the beginning, it's very important to be able to understand what people are saying. So we often practice email writing, the formats, the spelling, everything like that, the phrases, and then how to make a presentation, things like this, how to write a report. These can all be taught. Okay, somebody says that they do all of this daily and they don't see an improvement. it can take a lot of time. Not everybody is, not everybody's strong suit is learning languages. It can take people a different amount of time. So don't worry. It's important to keep practicing. Some days we have excellent days, some days we have bad days. I'm sure even in your native language, sometimes you can't think of a word or you're saying things wrong. This happens to me. I've been speaking English for nearly as long as I've been alive. So it's a very common problem when you're learning another language. The idea is to just keep at it, keep working away. One thing that a lot of people don't understand, if you were looking at your progress as a graph, where it starts here with nothing and it starts rising and rising, it's not going to just keep rising. That's not the way it works. You have good days, you have bad days, you have better days. And the idea is that you just have more and more better days until you become very fluent. Okay, let's go back here. Listening. The listening. How do you improve your general listening skills? I think starting off with the IELTS exam as the method for learning listening skills is probably not ideal. Listen to the radio, listen to TV shows, documentaries, things where people speak English properly and very well and very clearly, and take your time to really understand. And like I said earlier, write down any words that you don't know of and look them up later. Make sure that your vocabulary is excellent. This can be really helpful for spotting the words and phrases that you need to answer the questions. For example, section 3 is almost always about education. For example, it will be teachers and students talking about a project that they are working on or an assignment. Learn all that you can about studying at school and university, then you won't have any problem with this section. Education is an IELTS topic that we teach on Cambly. It's very useful. It gives you lots of useful words and phrases and teaches you how to use them. And there's some nice IELTS questions attached to that for you to practice on. Don't lose attention. You're only going to hear this once. Don't spend time looking around or thinking about what was that last thing they said. You've got to keep moving. As I said, you'll only hear it once. If you miss out on something, forget about it. Worry about it at the end when you're filling in all your questions. Go back, have a look, see if there's something that you can fill in. Again, have a guess. You'll be reading, writing, and listening all at the same time. So it's very normal to miss out on some parts. Don't worry about that. And this next one is interesting. Don't write your answers too quickly. Imagine I am having a conversation with my friend, and I said, "Oh yes, I'm coming to visit on Friday." If the question says, "What day is Alan coming to visit?" Don't write down Friday yet. Maybe later on in the conversation, I would say, "Oh, I forgot. I have something to do on Friday. I'll come back Saturday." So Saturday is the real answer. Don't be too quick to write down an answer. You might hear something different as it goes. Okay, let's go back to the chat. Let's see what people are saying. Somebody says thank you. You're very welcome. Somebody asked me what my ID on Cambly is. You can find a link to my profile in the chat box, in the description below this video, if you want to come have a chat. Also in there, you can see the great deal that Cambly is giving. Okay, some tips for beginners. Beginners IELTS practicers. Okay. Well, I would recommend start slowly. Don't expect to be excellent overnight. I've taught people before who were speaking for just one day and they became frustrated that they didn't have all the answers. Like I said, I've been speaking English nearly all my life. I don't always have the answers, Sometimes questions are difficult. Sometimes words and phrases are hard to remember, hard to pronounce. Just keep going. You'll be fine. If you can find a partner to work with or somebody that you can practice and listen to and speak to, that's excellent. That's really highly advised. If you're by yourself, listen to the radio, listen to podcasts, read the newspapers, read articles online, and try to imitate people that you hear speaking in English. One really nice thing is try to pick somebody that you're a fan of, maybe a footballer, a cricket player, a singer, If they speak English, watch an interview with them. Listen to the things that they say. It's important, I think, to have fun and to be interested in what you're actually listening to. It makes it much easier to remember and to spend time concentrating on. Plus, if it's someone famous talking about something that they did that you know of, it's really easy to remember. You get lots of confidence. How to learn new words? Reading. Always read. Look up the words if you don't know what they mean. Okay. So people want some idioms there. There's some very famous idioms. Some people tell me they don't like using idioms because they sound maybe a little bit old-fashioned. So I think using idioms is a great idea. You can find lists of idioms online and their explanations. Raining cats and dogs. That's a great one. It just means it's raining a lot. It doesn't mean that there's animals falling from the sky. Over the moon means you're very happy, not that you're an astronaut. So let's see. One thing that a lot of people don't realize is in some parts of the writing part 2 in particular, do not use too many idioms. It's supposed to be a formal piece, so you should speak in a clear and formal way. Try not to use too many, and especially if you make a mistake or you misunderstand an idiom, which is very easy to do, it can ruin your answer. What is the difference between American and British dialect of English? It's most obvious when people stress different parts of words. They pronounce things differently. British people will call that metal aluminium. I believe in the United States they say aluminum. Another thing that is a big difference is it's most obvious in the written word. We will spell color, C-O-L-O-U-R. In the US, they will say C-O-L-O-R. Somebody asks if you can use words like gonna. No, don't. Gonna means going to. And it's just a really quick and casual way of saying them. Absolutely fine with your friends. If you're chatting on the internet, whatever, that's absolutely fine, but not in an exam. It might roll off the tongue a little bit easier, but saying gonna, maybe the examiner is thinking, okay, this guy doesn't know that it's going to. He thinks it's gonna, which is not ideal. That's why I recommend reading newspapers and listening to news reports and podcasts and documentaries, because people will speak in a serious and formal way. Somebody says that they have trouble remembering words. This is normal. Everybody does this in their own language. What you can do is say them out loud. Try to remember the context that you want to use them in. Let me use an example. A book. Okay, most people know what a book is, but this is just an example. What do you do with a book? I read a book. I rent the book from the library. I gave a book to my friend. This is my favorite book. If you remember sentences around these words, you'll more easily remember them. You'll more easily remember how to use them in future. Can I read short stories to improve English? Absolutely. I love short stories personally. I highly recommend it. Pick something that you're interested in or something that you like. Again, I mentioned an author earlier today, Roald Dahl. I'll type his name in the chat in a little while. And he has some great short stories. He has some great stories for kids. So if you're reading a level is very low, it's a very nice place to start. And they're very fun and they're very nice. And they're great for kids as well. If you feel like giving a book to your kid after you've learned it yourself, it's an excellent gift. Somebody is asking for my channel, my Cambly channel. It's in the description down below. It's also in the description is a 15-minute trial of Cambly for just 99 rupees. Click the link in the description and follow through, and you'll find it there. And come and chat to me about anything you like. Okay, I wish you all the best of luck, and hopefully I'll see you again. Take care. Bye-bye.